Welcome to the meeting, guys. My name is Ken Thomas. I'm the president of Jacksonville Broadcasters Association. Hopefully at the end of this year, we'll be switching presidents. Anybody want to help me out there? That'd be great. Today, we are going to have a small discussion on basically some changes in the industry since COVID, through COVID, and after COVID. And we have a couple of guest panelists, one who's still working in the media, Rich Jones, and one who is just retired out of the media and is now teaching and I guess in education / public relations, and that's Mike McCormick. So before we start, I just wanted to give you guys a heads up on the group. We are still active. If you're following us on social media, you should have, obviously, those of you who are here probably saw the announcement. We're trying to do a much better job getting the word out about the group. And I'll be honest with you guys, it's hard. There's a lot of people who don't want to come back. There's a lot of people who don't like group meetings. And we've just lost track of a bunch of people. We have, according to our email list, we have almost 200 people that are interested in the group, and only about 30 who are really interested and want to pay dues. So if you haven't paid your dues now, pay your dues tonight. You can see Mike Lyons, our treasurer, and we'll get you set up on the paid list. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to somebody who actually talks for a living, and that's Mike Miller. He's going to be your MC. And I'm going to actually go supervise our interns who are running around operating the cameras and do what I did for a living and put together the video, have them help them put together the video. So Mike, it's all on you.
This is on. This is on.
Switch hello? Yep. You want to turn me on? Am I on now?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Hello. This was all put together very, very quickly because we had a lot of different changes. I guess any change is different, but nevertheless, I made the mistake of having lunch with Ken yesterday, and he said, guess what? And then we found, hello, Dan. And then we found out that unfortunately a couple of the guests that we had scheduled for today also could not make it, but we did get a last minute, thank goodness, fill-in. And I'll tell you more about that coming up in just a moment. First of all, I'd like to thank all of the ladies who showed up for today. You all look splendid, ladies, dressed well for the occasion. If any of you are single, so am I. So I'd be happy to take any kind of applications that might come on down that line. I'm looking forward to this. I've been out of it for quite a while, except for doing a couple of stints with JCT. When Melissa was on vacation, I really stopped my work at JTA. Well, I stopped at JTA in 2019, but I actually left OKV in 2000 after 7 years. So it's been too many years since I've been on it. And it's interesting because I just got a phone call this morning from my former program director at WXYZ in Detroit, which was an ABC-owned station when I worked there. And I hadn't heard from him in ages, and we're going to be getting together. So I thought it was kind of it was coincidental, and it was kind of ironic that on the day that I was going to be hosting this, I would hear from my old boss from many more years, because I was at WXYZ back in 1980. So that goes back quite a long time. Anyhow, let's move on to what we're going to be doing today. First of all, I want to introduce a successor, not my successor, but a successor for my show. When I turn the mic over to Rich Jones.
Oh, that's a disaster waiting to happen right there.
Tell me. You thought I was going to sit down and not move.
And it was teeter. Thank you, Steve.
Rich is the host of the Jacksonville Morning News, Jacksonville's Morning News on WOKV. It's now 104.5. There was no FM when I was on the air. In fact, there was hardly an AM when I was on the air. Rich joined OKV in 06 after 10 years as reporter, anchor, and news director at radio stations. He was a Michigander.
Small world?
Yeah.
I interned at WXYZ Television.
No kidding.
1996, so 16 years after you had left.
You know who
so
we had on this stage
world.
months ago was, and this is from WDID, hello, DID.
DIV?
Yeah.
Mort Crib?
We had Mort here.
Good old Mort.
Mort lives here. In
I
Queens
hate to
Harbor.
say it, but I grew up watching Mort Crib.
Didn't we all? And Bill Bonds, in my situation. Anyhow, Rich was news anchor and news director at radio stations Grand Rapids, Benton Harbor, and Niles. OKVFM has been recognized annually with the RTDNA Murrow and Associated Press Awards for overall excellence. I will tell you that in the 7 years that I broadcast at OKV, we never won anything, including the ratings contest. And he won that overall excellence for newscast, breaking news, and severe weather coverage. He's involved in many community organizations and causes, including his role as planner and host of the WOKV Carathon. Rich and his wife, Noelle, have 3 children, Avery, Harper, and Austin. And Austin's right there.
Hi, Austin. He's 6. Hi.
And he likes Twix.
And he loves, chocolate. He likes melted chocolate.
My kind of man. My kind of man. So, Rich, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. I appreciate you coming out today. Our other guest is Mike McCormick, who, thank goodness, joined us at the very last minute when we begged him to please come on and help us out with this. Otherwise, it was just going to be me and Rich, and he'd be tired of me after 5 minutes. Mike has had 4 different local newsrooms to Best Overall Awards in the regional Emmy and Edward R. Murrow Awards competitions. He's led multiple teams to #1 in the markets and broadcast, digital, and social metrics. He started in Jacksonville as an executive executive producer at TOV12, working up to news director. I would say that'd be moving down to news director, to be honest with you. Nobody asked. He's one of the very few news directors to ever lead 2 Jacksonville stations, as he also was the head man at Action News Jax. Mike's a former group news director in Sinclair Broadcasting, one of the largest privately owned broadcasting companies in the country. He helped grow ratings, page reviews, and digital engagement with more than a dozen news teams, as well as producing strategic projects across the group. Mike has focused creating content that connects with consumers. Additionally, he's created revenue-generating special projects by maximizing opportunities. His focus on innovative techniques for production create efficiency and high return on investment. He's a leader who grows to the top of the line of managing the bottom line. And this was written by Mike's mother, by the way. All right, guys, sit up. If you have questions, raise your hand and somebody will come by with a microphone.
I saw the WOKV polo. Thanks. Thank you for representing.
I don't have anything from OKV. I want something, Rich, from OKV.
I will bring it. Okay.
Please do.
I have 690, 106.5, and 104.5. And you know what I don't have? Our current logo, because we have not updated any of the station logo stuff. So the one thing I don't have is what we're using right now.
The only thing I have is one picture that was taken, I guess, of my whole team in the morning, with Fortunato and, gosh.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah, good old Hey Joe. Anyhow, it was good. All right, I want to ask this question to start because it's one that's asked of me, or at least used to be asked of me, and I want to ask it of you guys. If somebody came up to you and said, do you recommend I get into the broadcast industry, what would you tell them?
I will tell them, well, I would probably ask first why. And depending on how the answer would go, that would probably dictate what the answer would be from me. But you know, I would say that the first thing I would probably say is, do you want to be rich? Or do you want to have a really comfortable life? Or do you want to age quickly? And do you want to get really tired? And do you want to resent or have people resent you on a regular basis? However, if someone asked me that and I asked why, and they said, you know, I love to connect with my community, I love to serve my community, I'm a storyteller naturally, I think that I can connect people. To me, that's the talent that we can then multiply in our industry. And so, yeah, if someone like that, I would say, well, tell me more about why you would want to get into it, because there is still a role for that. It's all storytelling, it's all local storytelling. But if someone thinks that they're going to get into this industry and do a one-dimensional job today and make a ton of money doing it, I would say you want to probably find something else. But there are still fun moments. We still have fun. What would you say, Mike?
Yeah, my answer would be no. But I do need to qualify that. And my youngest was offered a job to produce in this market 12 months before she graduated from Florida State. She never took a broadcasting class, never took a journalism class, and was offered a job at one of the major 3 affiliates here.
Who did she know?
You know,
I said, who did Dad know?
yeah, luckily she's thought better of it. But the reason that I would really say no is because this idea of broadcasting that I think as I look out here and I see all these faces, it doesn't really exist anymore. And I think that's the first thing you would need to sit down and think about. You're really now going into content creation, and it goes far beyond the idea of sending signals out through television towers. And if we get to it at some point, I will talk about next generation broadcasting, and I was on the ground floor with Media One, who is rolling that out across the country. And there is the potential that maybe that will bring broadcasting back in the way that we know it. But today, it's so much more about doing more and doing everything to go over multiple platforms, multiple screens. You no longer can just be a TV broadcaster or a radio broadcaster. You've got to be able to build your own graphics. You've got to be able to understand how to go out through 10 or 12 social media platforms, and they invent a new one about every 30 seconds that somebody wants to get out on. And then because the revenue pie, especially at the local station level, continues to either shrink or at best maybe stay the same, the salaries are just pressed down. Hiring is close to impossible, especially since COVID. You know, you look at TV news producers. These are the people that are writing the words that are go out there. In Philadelphia, number 4 market, they only hire from the 9 schools in the Philadelphia area.
Really?
And they hire all of them straight out of school. Now, how is a market like Chattanooga, Tennessee going to compete when they're fighting for the same producers? The kids that come out of broadcasting school now, and I oversaw multiple news operations across the country, we got really excited if we could get them through 90 days. Because I can't tell you the number that would pay $250,000 to get an education from Syracuse, one of the top schools in the country, come in for 90 days and would walk back in, despite the fact they had a contract, just say, I talked to my mom and dad, I don't like this. So mom's agreed that she'll pay for me to walk around Europe for 90 days while I figure out what else I want to do with my life. And just walk away from a...
Tell them I've got 90 days. I'd be happy to.
Absolutely. I usually asked if their mom would adopt me. But so, yeah, I think right now it's in a big flux as we sit down and look at it, and as we see where more and more stuff is going. The competition is at a all-time high, and it's from places that we would have never considered competition that unfortunately audiences do. It's so frustrating to sit behind the glass in a focus group, and typically the first question that I always would get asked is, where do you get your local news? Right. And starting about 15 years ago, you would start to hear this chorus of Facebook is the answer. And I can remember I would sit back there for years and go, Facebook's not a news source. And finally about 5 years ago, I sat down and went, okay, whether I think it is or not,
Doesn't matter.
The reality is it is. And that starts leading down a whole path of misinformation and disinformation, because I follow Rich, so if Rich shares something, I assume Rich has vetted it, but Rich saw it from his brother-in-law, who got it from somebody, and the next thing I know, we may not even be passing stuff that's vetted information. So yes, I am a little cynical on the business right now, but I'm still trying to figure out what the business is at this point.
Well, and that was going to be my next question, almost as a follow-up to the idea of would you go into the industry? Because my question would be, and do what? What is it that you want to do? What do you see yourself doing? When you guys entered, did you, and keeping it in broadcasting, did you ever think as you entered that you would end up doing what you ended up doing before you left broadcasting and knew what you're doing now, Rich?
On some level, yes, because I got into this career as a Metro Detroit native thinking that I would replace Ernie Harwell, the voice of the Detroit Tigers, because I grew up listening to Ernie Harwell and hoping that I could do that. So he stood there like the house by the side of the road was like embedded in my brain. So I knew that somehow storytelling would be a part of what I wanted to do. I just didn't know exactly how I would do it. I thought sports was going to be my entry. And early on I realized if I'm going to have a long career in this, I have to start somewhere probably small, do a lot of things to get a variety of skill set, and then determine where I want to go with that. And I caught the proverbial news bug pretty early because my first radio station was a news and in an AOR formatted FM and AM in a small town near South Bend, Indiana. And as a Michigan native, like I hated WNIL and WAOR in Michiana, Southwest Michigan.
I have cousins that live in Michigan.
See,
In fact,
we have- look at
I'm
all these
going in
connections
July.
we
I'm
have.
going there in July to
I
spend
love
a few days.
this. As a guy from Michigan, though, I hated being in South Bend or near South Bend. You know?
See, I was from Munster, Indiana, which was, it was right next to Gary.
But I knew that I would have some sort of a career in the storytelling. I just didn't think that I would be in I didn't think I'd be in Florida. I didn't know where Jacksonville was until about 17 years ago when I got a call from someone. I didn't know we were here. I kind of always thought it would be Michigan. I always thought that there would be something in radio. I guess I saw myself on TV or radio, but I didn't see doing this per se. And to your question, I also didn't think, because we didn't know what social would be, we didn't know what digital would be, we didn't know how the platforms would continuously evolve. I never would have thought that I would be doing as much work that I do now to try to get attention on the main platform, which is through the speaker. I never thought that that would happen. I thought it would be a very simple sort of thing with doing one job. You're a reporter. One job, you're an anchor. And early in my career it was that, but not for very long. That's turned over really quickly.
It is, and did that happen because of economics? That it would be cheaper saying, let's get Rich Jones to do it, and we don't have to have, Sabrina do it or something like that?
Sure.
And then...
Yeah, I think it's
Obviously,
dynamics of how the industry has continued to evolve. I mean, we're letting go of people through attrition. Thankfully, we're not chopping a ton of heads. In fact, in the 16 years I've been at WOKV, we have only lost a couple of positions that were not through attrition. When we eliminated sports as a sports department, and that was around the time of 2009-10, Cole Pepper moved on to a couple of other gigs, and then he was with Channel 4. Austin, you're being kind of loud and talkative. I'm the one who's talking up here. I'm putting pressure.
We have an extra chair.
So through attrition, it's happened. I think just with the challenging demands that with social, and as social has continued to evolve, and then trying to get attention visually on all of the different platforms, that has been a new avenue where. And it's not so much that my job has changed where I'm now required to do it. I just realized that if I'm going to get attention on the brand, if I'm not going to do it for myself and for my brand and for the bigger brand, then who the heck else is going to do it? But I think the economics has really accelerated it. And I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other things to look on that. The simple answer to your start of your question, did I ever think I would do what I did at the end, in the beginning? No. And some of that was very simple. I remember as I was just starting in college, they were talking about this thing that might happen called HD TV. And they thought it was 3 or 4 years away. And I went into the industry and worked over a decade before I was actually at WRAL when we put the first experimental HD TV station on the air in 1996. If anybody's wondering, the first ever HD broadcast in the United States was Prince William versus the Durham Bulls, who WRAL owned. Prince William won 1-0 in 9 innings. It was seen by a total of 1 person because Mr. Wolf had the only television set in the entire country, I think, that could receive an HD signal at the time. But I think there have been a couple things that have happened that we have to sit down and think about. One, we all got into a business that was heavily regulated. And through time, we saw the regulation, break down. I remember at Gannett at one point, we owned like 18 television stations. And it was like, wow, how could you have gotten so big? And you look at somebody like Nexstar today, and Gray, and Sinclair, that all own close to 200, in some cases more than 200 television stations. The regulations have changed, but where they haven't changed is broadcast is regulated to a standard that all its competitors out there in information are not. And, Google doesn't have the same regulation. Apple doesn't have the same regulation. Facebook, Meta doesn't. I mean, when you sit down and you look at revenue and saying, where, people get caught, if you look at estimated revenue worldwide in 2020, TV was $400 billion. And everybody goes, TV's really king. But you got to really sit down and describe what does that really mean. So if you look at the leading companies worldwide, Alphabet, or Google, 268 billion euros worldwide in 2022. The next biggest company is not even half of that. And as I go down here, it's before I get to number 4, the Walt Disney Company, that you would say you had anybody that does television. But let's be honest, ABC's kind of a hobby for the Walt Disney Company. They do a lot of other things that aren't really doing that. You want to take it out of worldwide and just come into the...
I'm sorry, but I thought Ron DeSantis was
Yeah,
the hobby for Disney.
but if you go over the big 6 in the United States companies and you go down through them, again, you don't really see TV on this list. The Fox News Channel at number 6 would be the closest that you would think of as something that almost what we did traditionally. Again, cable is regulated differently than broadcasting are.
Yep.
So because the playing field is not level, it's killing broadcasting. Because you can't own all across the country, just like Google and all those others can, you can't compete on a level one-to-one playing field. So it is driving them down. Then 2, the job in the beginning was about storytelling. It was, before storytelling was really just about journalism. It was going out to comfort the inflicted, inflict the comfortable. You know, give a voice to the voiceless. Stand up to City Hall because nobody else could do it. And then we moved it into to be about journalism, but with storytelling to make it a little bit more interesting to watch. Today it's all about distribution, because to be able to reach the number of people that we could reach in a newscast now takes multiple channels, multiple streams, and you have to go back and count it over days. You know, when I started early on at WBIR in Knoxville, Tennessee, we had a 6 o'clock book where we had a 49 share of the audience. 49 share. Half the people in Knoxville, Tennessee watched our news. Today you can look at markets like Seattle and stuff where you can get to the 11 o'clock news, 3%, and that's all the stations put together. I mean, and that shows you just how fragmented our business has gotten. And the downsides of what's that created is, I like to think we were a trusted source. I would like to think we are still a trusted source. But you've probably sat and researched that I have too. Yeah. And it's scary, the number of people that will come in right away and say, nope, you're fake news. You're not real. And they all have one story somewhere, one time in their life where maybe we did get it wrong. But based on that one thing that people sit down now and don't trust. And so it is, it's crazy that when you sit down to do something right now, you think about things like logistics, technology. Technology has changed, and it's one of the things that has made it easier to do some of what we do. You can definitely create far more content in a single day than you could at one time. But now you're really having to think about not only how can I create it, how can I aggregate it in ways to try to go out so I can try to still get that share of the audience. And you know, here's the tough thing. I mean, I lived and died for 35 years by TV news. A few people out there that I worked with that would stand here and tell you that I lived and died and I watched everything. I don't watch the TV newscasts very often anymore. Now, I do consume their content digitally, but it's far more convenient for me because I can get it when I want it. I can skip through and see the things that are important, the things that I want to see, and the things that I don't care about. You know, a car accident in the northwest part of Jacksonville, I probably don't care about. So I'm going to skip that and move on to something else. So it is crazy where the business has gone. And then the now with, since COVID and remote work, Rich let me know that he did broadcast from his home this morning. And I listened. I had no idea he was that he was at home. But
it wasn't COVID related. It was 6-year-old related.
But COVID created that ability for us that all of a sudden it was okay to work from home. And so you are now. I went into 3 newsrooms last Wednesday. I did the big 3 here in town, and it's unbelievable. I was in one of them at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and there were like 6 total people. Wow. And they're quiet, like libraries. I mean, it's unbelievable when you're in, you know, and it's crazy to me when you go just how few people you see. It changes the dynamic of what were teams. I mean, we used to have a pretty big softball league here, media-wise, pretty competitive. Mike Lyons was an ace pitcher. but you don't have that kind of camaraderie anymore. And it's one of the things that's leading to the turnover that we're seeing in the business, because if you work out of your apartment,
You don't have the interaction
you
with
don't
any.
have the interactions with any of the people. And then that further isolates the people, which makes the journalism worse, because now they're not engaged in a day in and day out. They're not getting the advice, if you worked at First Coast, from a Ken Amaro, who'd been in this market for years, that he can just incite wisdom to you as you walk by it. They're just 22 years old from Daytona State University, and they got a job for $38,000, and if they want to stay, they're living there, and they get bored at some point, and quite honestly, Starbucks is just as interesting as doing what we do.
It's really a shame, though. Rich, you want to follow up on that?
I mean, I'm forever the optimist, both in the room, maybe, and but also just in life. I'm trying to think of like the positives that still come with it. But I agree with so much of what Mike said, especially on the camaraderie part, because of the just when you have a team trained up and you feel like, all right, finally we have the right pieces in place, turnover. And for Jacksonville radio, being a barely top 50 market, but market 46, 47, depending on census data, we're lucky if we can keep someone for 2 to 3 years. We're the ones who somehow, some way, we get roped in, usually because of family, and then we just decide we don't leave, but we're lucky. Channel 4 is seeing that right now, where we have Jim Piggott, and that's going to be it at the end of the day, who's got more than 30 years in the market. And so,
Tom Willis, too, I'm sure.
And Tom is a couple years. I mean, I was actually surprised John and Mary went before Tom, but that's his choice. But I still look at the positive that I see in it is the fast turnover that's happening. I just embrace it and say it's going to bring fresh perspective, fresh ideas, and make me hopefully a better storyteller in the community, a better journalist ultimately, and really better to the community that I serve if I fully am able to embrace the ideas they have. And especially as a younger, I mean, can you believe a 6-year-old is kind of like talking about Wi-Fi over in the corner of the room and playing on his iPad? And I mean, he doesn't know what a magazine is. And when he hears my name on the radio or hears me on the radio, he doesn't know how that happens, but he doesn't push buttons. He goes to my phone and looks for an app. But I still get upbeat about, at least I'm learning that, and I can find how I can still connect with an audience on all of those different platforms. So I've kind of learned to embrace the change and accept that if I'm not going to go along with it, then I'm going to be left by the side of the road. So that's why I'm the optimist with it.
If we have some...
Let me add one more thing.
Sure.
And while it may sound negative, I want to be clear, we need to figure this out. Because if we're not going to do journalism, then my question is, who will? And, it's one of the interesting, working for kind of a quasi-government, I'm funded through a grant at the Florida Poison Control to put out poison information. And doesn't usually get very partisan when you're giving out information to save people's lives. What I'm surprised about is my ability to call a television station or sometimes radio or sometimes newspaper, and my ability to create content for them that goes on. Now, some of it people know me, some of it is it's not that controversial, but 25 years ago, we would have never accepted a handout from anybody, much less government, private, whatever. And what scares me is if we don't have trained journalists that are out there doing this, it is just going to be anybody, because quite honestly, he's a content creator right now at age 6. He can, with that iPad that he has, do everything that it used to require us to have a $125,000 live truck and a reporter and this. With an iPad, he can do all of that. He can go live. He can get out into a world to do it. It's crazy when you start looking at some of these social media influencers right now, which again, I would like to say, that's not journalism. My 21-year-old just graduated from Florida State. And she came home the other day, she goes, we can't eat at Chipotle anymore. I said, really? That's disappointing. I really like it there. And I said, why not? She says, oh, because they use seed oil. I said, oh, what seed oil? And she said, I don't know, but on TikTok they said it's bad, so everybody's not going to Chipotle anymore. I still don't know what seed oil is. I'm still eating at Chipotle, but I am worried that there's a whole group of people in their young 20s that may run Chipotle out of business because some influencer somewhere said something called seed oil is a bad thing. But that's what we fight. I mean, one of the biggest things I do in education right now is fight social media challenges. The newest one is called chroming. Chroming is a lot like what huffing used to be, but with a new name, where people are basically, sniffing up some sort of things. Just killed a 13-year-old internationally, and they think because it's on TikTok, it will start happening here. But it's amazing to me the power that a TikTok account can have to influence people. It has what we had in TV one day, what newspaper, probably radio before us and newspaper before that.
Does the FCC have a role anymore in regulating broadcasting?
I mean, they say they do. I think they believe that they do.
I mean, we don't have the equal time provisions as
Yeah,
we used
so
to
much
have.
has evolved, changed, and relaxed through the years, and then I
Or
think...
the fairness doctrine, where you had to do that as well.
Yeah. And I think with emerging technology and emerging platforms, it probably is distracting a lot of the regulation that probably should exist, that's out there.
Well, but it goes back to what Mike said too. When you think about Meta and you think about all of these other platforms, they're not regulated by the FCC. So if you're part of the traditional broadcast industry, how do you compete with that when you've got somebody who's got their hand on your shoulder saying you can't do that when they're doing it 18 hours out of 24 a day?
Well, there are still fines that are being leveled against radio. Thank goodness, not against our company here in Jacksonville or WOKV in the years that I've been there. Or you? No, thank goodness. I think on a larger platform, you can speak more to it for television, but I do believe that they still have the thumb on the scale, but maybe it's just a little bit of a lighter thumb these days.
Well, interestingly, because the company I was working for was part of a major fine, and what I found out is most people don't pay those fines. The FCC gets the headlines, we fined X company $200 million, and the company says, okay, we'll agree to it, we won't admit fault, and by the way, we're not going to pay you, and everything just goes on. I think with the FCC, one of two things has to happen. Either regulate everybody, or don't regulate anybody. But it's not fair to regulate some, and that would be any business. If this restaurant was regulated and wasn't allowed to serve hamburgers in a sports bar, but sneakers and strings were, in time it would run this place out of business. True. And and as one who still likes some moral decency, I think there is a value to the FCC and some of the stuff they do. But around this room, show of hands, how many of you have at least one streaming service? So that's everybody. So if you want to look down right now, how many of your favorite show is probably on a streaming service versus one of the traditional networks? Just show of hands. Well, the streaming services can do stuff they can't do on TV, so it's not a level playing field for ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, because at 8 o'clock at night, we can flip over and watch Netflix, Apple, Hulu, Prime. I mean, there's so many different services out there.
So those traditional stations, Channel 4, for instance, they've got 4 Plus, don't they now, which is their streaming? So are they regulated, other than whatever the corporation dictates, would they be regulated less on 4 Plus than they would be on Channel 4?
Yes, there is some lesser regulation. You're really going to get into some stuff like hours that you have to close caption. I mean, you get into some stuff like that really comes down. But anything that goes out through the broadcast spigot is regulated. But News4Jax is not regulated on the internet side. Right. So they can do what they want on News4Jax, but if it comes through the antenna, and in many of the markets that I was looking at, over-the-air viewing was down to like 5-10%. In very few places do you get more than 15-25%. You got to get out into the hinterlands, the middle part of the country, where sometimes there's not as good internet, and in which case broadcasting still has value. But that's the exciting thing that a lot of people aren't worried or know about is next-gen television. And it's being rolled out right now across the country. Downside, they had to make it backwards compatible like we did the last time, so none of our TVs are going out. Now, what can we do with next-gen television? Number one, it allows us to go to 4K broadcasting. And if any of you have had the chance to see 4K, the only thing that's sad is South Korea is already doing 8K and it looks so much better. But 4K, is tremendous. If you watch football and you see these replays now where they can like zoom down to the foot on the line, those are typically shot with 4K cameras, then down converted, but that's why the pixel level is so high that they can go in, and you'll definitely see that in things like the Super Bowl. So 4K is very exciting. Two, you can now be hooked up when it comes into your home. There will essentially be a receiver in your home that then sends the signal to all your devices. So essentially it's kind of like Wi-Fi, that's a different name, but so you'll have a box that it comes into, so now you can watch your over-the-air television on your phone, your tablet. If you're sitting in the pool and you just want to watch the game, you just hold your phone right there as you're sitting in your raft and be able to watch the game. That's huge. The phone companies, the thought will be if they can be forced, especially by the government, this is where regulation may need to come in, to put receivers in the phones. And the phone companies say they don't want to do that because it's costly. But it's a computer chip. It's not that freaking costly. I mean, what do you pay for an iPhone these days? Like $700, $800? I mean, you know, to put a little bit more on it at this point, big deal. The reason AT&T and all of those don't want to do it is they want to control the content and the streaming to their phones because you're paying data fees. If they put these little microchips in that are antennas, you will now be able to receive over-the-air content and you're not going to pay data fees. Well, do you think AT&T, Sprint, any of those want to give up their data fees? There's no way. It brings in public service. The case of Cherish Periwinkle, who was kidnapped out of a Walmart on the north side. The local stations would have had the ability, with NextGen TV if they wanted it, they could have turned on the devices inside of everybody's home up there within a 10-mile radius. They could geolocate to that area and say, can you please go outside and look for a white van right now? We've got a girl kidnapped. I mean, that's a lot of power to be able to bring in it. Now, there's some argument, much like when many of us got woken up a few weeks ago when the state screwed up and put out the false alert. Nobody wants to be on the hook for who is making the decision, but we will have that ability. And lastly, through this service, once it gets into your home, it can also connect with your Wi-Fi. You will have the ability to talk back to a television station. So every station in town can essentially become its own free over-the-air cable service. So when you look at companies like Sinclair that own the Tennis Channel and regional sports networks and the College Football Channel, starting a 24-hour news show, they're building out a lineup. Nextstar's doing it also, but they're building out a lineup so that they will have content to be able to fill, which is going to allow you to cut a lot of your data fees and a lot of your streaming fees. Again, controversial, because the people that are getting streaming fees, data fees and stuff, guess what they don't want? Your ability to do that. It will create new revenue streams for local people. Oh, the ratings are unbelievable. They're actually accurate because everything is 100% addressable that comes back. So those of us that lived for years with Nielsen just screwing with our lives. Arbitron, I guess probably in your case. Still Nielsen now? No, the ratings are, and they're down to the second. I mean, it gets a little bit scary if we want to go into it, that I could now call you in and say, Rich, we need to talk about your interview with Governor Scott this morning. It was really good until the third question, because I will now be able to see second by second when people tuned in or tuned out. Rich, I find that when you use this word, the audience doesn't like it, and this word that they do, so use. I mean, it's unbelievable what you can do with it. But the other thing is, it allows new services to come in from local television, where you could now do on-demand movies, you could do all sorts of stuff. You would be able to create, because once you've connected now through the internet, you're not going to know whether something's being sent to your device through the air or through the internet. So if they can now do on-demand, what this will do is create more revenue. If it creates more revenue, what we would be able to do locally is go back and start to staff up newsrooms. Because the reality is, and again, I look at producers because that's the one that's so hard. You go from about market 90 to about market 10, and everybody pays within a few $1,000s the same thing. So if you're a kid coming out of school, you can go back to your home market now and skip all the feeder markets coming up. And the problem is, all of us that worked in journalism for so long, we know you go to those small markets so you can make mistakes. that you can learn from those mistakes, so that the time you get to the bigger markets where those mistakes would be magnified 100 times, they don't get that experience. And then, the reality is you're still talking about an industry that producers now are kind of between $38,000 and $55,000. And that's just tough to live. And if mom and dad paid $100,000 or $200,000 for you to go to school, at some point they look at their friends that are, selling mortgages and delivering packages for Amazon, and they go, I can make just as much money waiting tables and delivering packages for Amazon as I can as a broadcast producer.
Are there any questions, by the way, from out here? Any of you have any questions? We do have a microphone. Hold on. Getting the mic.
While you're doing that, I could say this: thank God you don't work for the Florida Times Union.
We were going to get to that.
I saw yesterday they said they had a strike. They have 22 newsroom employees now. When they first moved into the new building, I was asking Dan the total number of people, and I believe Pat Yack was the editor at that time, because I toured it right before they opened it. It was just a sea of desks. And I said, Pat, what are you going to do with all these desks? He goes, oh, we'll have 250 people. Dan told me they had 40 people in sports at that time. There are 22 total people in the newsroom right now.
I was going to say the same thing about the 22 people. I saw that too. Man, that's very scary. What resonates with what you guys are saying, you said it earlier, and I really agree. I think it's all about storytelling. I mean, the newspapers and what it was, the broadcasts, I can get my weather through my phone and it's more accurate, and all that happens. But so I've retreated from all the bad news and all the crap that's out there into podcasts. Great storytelling, whatever you want, whenever you want it, and it's sort of soothing to the soul as opposed to having to go to any of the platforms anymore. And unfortunately, I've got about 7 streaming services and paying for them all, but it's worth it. Better than movies in terms of a yearly cost.
Have you already downloaded the New York Times audio podcast?
I have.
$29.95, but that is now newspaper storytelling to radio to audio, which that's the worry for me. I mean, for years it was HD radio or what Sirius XM would do to take out local radio, and maybe there was a certain 7% of the audience that would choose Sirius XM, and then it would decline to maybe 3% once the first year of your new car subscription, when you have to start paying for it. I worry more about the podcasts that are both free and even the ones that are paid for, because I love listening to podcasts on my drive into the office, because George Norrie is still good with Coast to Coast AM, but I can only listen to him so many times. I'll listen to a 25-minute podcast on my 22-minute drive in, start getting ready and everything, and that's the story that I need to get my day started. I worry about, is my kid going to want to listen to that or listen to Dad on the radio in the next 5 to 7 years?
And the New York Times, I subscribe to that, so I get the podcast free.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, along with the cooking.
Yep.
You know, besides.
Here's the other thing with podcasts that we need to think about. If I could make one change today, if you asked that the question, it would be that media companies couldn't be publicly traded. Because one of the things we run into right now is everything is about that next quarter earnings call. It's all about that. It's all short-term thinking. So podcasting, which is bringing back a lot of things, it faces 2 problems. One, you don't need to think about how many downloads I got this week. I need to think of how many downloads you're going to get in perpetuity. Because sometimes a podcast may sit with very few downloads, and 2 years later, it all of a sudden gets discovered, shared with the right people, and then boom, it takes off and can do a lot of downloads. So it's no longer about investing money into a podcast and saying we have to all return it by Friday. We got to return it over by 5 years. That's going to be a huge mind shift change of media management that's not there right now with publicly traded. The second problem you run into with storytelling is most of us gravitate to the kind of stories we want to hear. So, when I was a kid, there were basically 4 television stations. There was an ABC, an NBC, a CBS, and a PBS in Memphis, Tennessee, where I grew up. Somewhere before 10, we got an independent station. But, the old joke was, man, if the president came on TV, you were screwed, because there were only 3 real choices to watch at night. Now there's so many choices out there. The hard thing becomes, what you like for storytelling, Rich may not like, or I may not like. So all of us can go out there and kind of self-select what we like, but there's so much stuff out there. How does anything hit that tipping point to where it can be profitable? And that's just the difficult thing that we face. And the thing that's killing storytelling with young kids is 288 characters, because they grow up with Twitter, and anything beyond 288 characters, their attention span is gone. So you tell a good, rich story the way that I like to tell a story. A lot of times you can't even pull a kid into it. And we were looking at some of these second-by-second ratings. That's one of the things that we continued to see, is that because you have a billion choices, you're going to flip. And I remember I did a presentation on this about 8 or 10 years ago. I said there used to be a time that you started the 10 or 11 o'clock news, and you just did it every night. It was the thing that you sat down and did. And if it didn't kind of grab you in that first 90 seconds or a minute, you might flip to the beginning of the streaming services. Today, it's the opposite. People start with the streaming services, and if they really can't find anything through their whole menu of streaming services, then they might check out television. And you forget this, that the number one biggest search engine out there is Google. Do you know what number 2 is?
Yeah, Bing?
YouTube.
Really?
Do you know who owns YouTube? Google. So the number 1 and number 2 largest content players, and by the way, the folks from Alphabet will stand up and tell you they're not in the content business, and they are liars. They are very much in the content business. They control number 1 and number 2. And if any of you that have children that are in their 20s, probably goes down to 6, kids grow up on YouTube and have that ability just to constantly flip to new content the second that they get older.
You just flipped that.
There you go.
Oh my God.
Without Wi-Fi, it's like a crisis.
Yeah, exactly. That was staged, right, Rich?
It was staged, yeah.
My question to you guys is, how do you see broadcasters using AI in the future? Storytelling, because we're already starting to see it. Colleges are having a hard time now defending against papers being written by ChatGPT. I see it in my kids. So how do you see broadcasters now pivoting from real people doing content to AIs generating content with just somebody managing that from above?
I'm going to be really fast and just say I'm going to bury my head in the sand and hope that I can retire before it takes me out, because it's a frightening thing. Isn't that funny? It is. It's frightening to see, and I haven't even put my toe in it. And it is a tidal wave of change that is happening in our industry right now with a ton of disruption. But you can see it even on producers' ends, I would think, right?
Well, no, the scary thing is we actually did research at one of the companies I was with back about 10 years ago, before ChatGPT, but it was another version of AI. And so we created a series of facts like would come into a newsroom, and we had 2 news producers write a 30-second story, and we had AI write a 30-second story. And we played it for focus groups. Who do you think got picked 9 out of 10 times as the best written story? Yeah, and that was 10 years ago. It's better now. And when you look at what we need to do with aggregating, nobody wants to be the first company to jump in to say they're doing it, because it just sounds scary and bad and like people won't trust. But if you could create a piece of content now and already have trained up, because ChatGPT gets smarter the more you use it. If you could have already trained it up from this story, write me 4 tweets, 2 Facebook posts, a YouTube description, radio, write me a 500-word article for the website, that becomes a game changer in your ability to put your content out there. The scary thing is it's got to be moderated. I mean, I'm not advocating to use it because it scares the hell out of me, and I've played around with it. But it's got to be moderated. And what scares me, I was at a presentation on this, because in our world, in the Poison Center world, we do 2 things. We take information and educational calls on people who have poisoned, 40% of them kids going on. The question was, could an AI chatbot do what we do? And all the Poison Center managers, only 55 of them in the country, and they're all a pretty similar age. They're all late 50s through mid 70s, most of them at least. And they're all immediately, no, you can't do what you do. We ran a test on it, and it did pretty good at giving out medical information. There's a lot of studies going on in medical right now to look at it for differential diagnosis. And the differential diagnosis it can spit out could say this one's 97%, this is 95, this one's 93. So a doctor could have 3 more opinions to look at before making a final decision. But they told a story at this conference. A lady decided to have it write an autobiography of her life. So it asked ChatGPT to write an autobiography of her life. And it was really fabulous till the last chapter where it gave her obituary for her dying because it had searched the internet and found somebody with the same name and pretty similar statistics and thought it was her. So it ended the story that way. So that is kind of the scary thing with AI.
Steve?
Well, I sort of have a devil's advocate alternative side to this. With limited resources in broadcasting, journalism in general, couldn't we use AI intelligently to do those simple things of rewrite the national story and take the New York Times and CNN and my network and combine that into the best story, look at the available video and spit this out? Yes, somebody has to look at it before it goes out on the broadcast, and write the tweets and the Facebook posts and the web story so that you can free up your human resource to do reporting and storytelling.
However, I fear that the companies that are running the local operation would take that first part and would stop there.
Which goes back to
And they would eliminate
the publicly
positions.
traded companies and the
Right.
profits.
Or those that are owned by private investment firms. So I think that would be my worry. Would be it could streamline a lot. I could certainly see it. It's almost like for lack of a better description, you would have a really good wire writer from Metro Networks, NBC News Radio, or the Associated Press feeding down the content to an AI-generated person in Jacksonville, Florida, who can rewrite that. Well, that's $35,000 a year plus the benefits that my company might not have to pay any longer. So I don't think that I don't know how many companies would see that as an opportunity, despite what we want to think, and I would love to see, to leverage that resource into another location.
And Mike, let me circle back too. If you want to talk more about AI, that's fine. But go back to podcasting, and we all like podcasting because we like long-term storytelling, and it does a great job. And you don't have to, monetize it today. But the realities of doing that on local stories is very difficult because it's a lot of investment. And on a national story, you can wait the 2 years for it to be picked up and go viral, but on a local story, it probably never will. That, I think what we all are concerned about, at least on the news side of the business, is how do we keep in with the newspaper diminishing every day? How do we tell important local stories in a splintered audience? Because yes, you can find content, and some is really, really good in a lot of places, but the important stories of your community and what's happening and keeping, and going back to your point, Mike, at the beginning, of making important people uncomfortable, how is that done?
So I think a couple of things based on what you said. We better get used to the idea of AI. It's going to happen. I mean, I feel that very, very strongly. So I think we better decide how we want to control it when we use it. And I think you're right. It could free up resources. And I think the answer to your question is, and I think this is the hard thing, everybody that's in the business right now is on a little wheel that's spinning. And it spins so fast that nobody is willing to sit down and say, maybe we really need to rethink how we built the newsroom. There was a big reunion of the First Coast folks in January, and a bunch of people said, I can't believe you're not doing this anymore. When are you getting back in? And I was like, why would I want to do that? But somebody again asked me just Friday, and I said, if I did get back in, I would want to go in somewhere where I got to say, we have to totally change the paradigm. And there are some interesting things going on across the country. There's a young lady, and I can't think of her name, in Tampa, that is doing kind of a hybrid podcast, long form. It's really more of a vlog than a podcast or a video podcast. But she's doing an interesting form of storytelling that runs 9 or 10 minutes, and it only takes a day or two to be done. but it would require us to move away from a thought that we only have 3 reporters today, so somebody's got to go down because the Jaguars are announcing a $2 billion project for this city. So we've got to go put that, and then we need to send somebody to go find Mayor Deegan to find out what she's going to do about it. And now all of a sudden we have nobody left to do storytelling. It's interesting, the idea of what Pat Yak wanted to create at the paper in May of 2000, I think is where a TV news operation is almost going to need to go, that you would create some units that did some separate things. The last company I was in Baltimore, Maryland, 17% of the kids who graduate from high school could read at that time. 31% were proficient in math. It was either 6 or 12 schools where 0 kids scored a proficient score on any of the proficiencies on what was going on. And by the way, they spent about $17,000 a year per student in Baltimore. How much do they spend here? It's about $8,000, $9,000? Right. So it's double what they're spending up there for results that were worse. And the owner of the company saw the movie Spotlight and came in to the news president one day and said, go see this movie. And he meant like that second, go see the movie. And the VP did, and he came back and he said, okay, I saw it's a great movie, what do you want to do? He says, I want to do that. He said, you want to investigate the Catholic Church? He said, no. He said, what I want to do is create units that will just sit down and focus on a single subject. And so they've got a unit up there that only focuses on the city school system. It's now expanded into the county school system. They don't even base it at the television station. They took it away from the television station for fear that they would get sucked. Yeah, you come in and be, Susie called out, so Mr. Patrick, you don't get to work on the schools today. You're gonna, and they're 100% on it. But it would really come down to us coming away with things that we don't want to think about. Consolidated writing of the national stories, it really doesn't make sense that producers in 212 markets are all rewriting whatever Joe Biden did today. I mean, it's ridiculous and silly. And the fact that somebody writes it and then we rewrite it 212 times is quite honestly ridiculous, and there aren't the economics to do it. So we do need to sit down and understand that there can be some sort of pulled content, and we're going to have to get comfortable with that. And look, in Gannett I forget what year it was, 02, 03, they came down and shoved the USA Today in the middle of our top-rated morning newscast at 6:45 in the morning, a key meter click point. And boy, I nearly got fired because I fought it so hard. The idea that somebody else was going to be producing content and put it in there. But now all the groups are doing it, right? Top to bottom. And here's the thing, they're going to have to, because that's the only way that we will ever be able to sit down and free up and say, we're going to staff this differently.
I hate to wrap it up, but we have to. But I know you wanted to talk about Gary Dettman before we break up. So
I don't know if many of you knew Gary Dettman. He was a longtime producer and then digital producer in this market. Must have done at least 10 years at First Coast and at least 5 or 6 at Action News. But he passed away recently, actually in the parking lot of WPEC in West Palm. Drove in not feeling well that morning and never made it out of his vehicle. He was a good guy. Some of you may remember him from softball that played with him. It was interesting at his memorial Friday night down in the West Palm area, the number of people that just came up and talked about, Gary wasn't a guy that was really close with a lot of people, but everybody counted on him. And you knew that if you needed a fact check, you could call in and he would do it. If you needed help getting a web story produced, he would do it for you. He's just a good guy, and just gone too soon from our business.
guys, I know we just scratched the surface of this. I have 10 other questions I would have loved to ask you. So we're going to bring you back. I hope we can do this as a second one. Thank you all.